Hey everyone, Shaun Stevenson here, author of the Throne series, and today is my first June on the Range of 2024 book that I read, and it was an interesting mixed bag. So let's talk about it. I guess you could say it was an interesting mixed saddlebag. But let's talk about it. So this book is Danny Orlis and the Case of the Talking Rocks by Bernard Palmer. This is book number 5 in the series. Oh, can you even see the 5? It's so hard to see. Oh, I don't know. I guess it's a 5. It's very difficult to see. Anyways, this is book number 5 in the Danny Orlis Adventure series, which came out in the 1980s. And I gotta say, I kind of wish I hadn't read this book first. I haven't read any of the other books in the series, and I kind of paid for it because there were some major spoilers in this book for previous books in the series. And there were some things I didn't really understand because there were characters that the Bernard Palmer was talking about that are from the other books that are not in this book, but they're being talked about as if you should know all about them. And I thought, oh no, I don't know any of these things, but I don't have books 1, 2, 3, or 4. I only have books 5 and 6 of this series, and this one looked the most westerny of all of them, so I decided to read it for June on the Range. It's a whole thing. So that leads me to an interesting place where I feel like I probably would have enjoyed this book more if I had read books 1 through 4 before reading this, but this series is really interesting. Okay, so let's back up the train here, the Western train, of course, the railroad, because this is an interesting series to talk about. This series began in the 1950s and then has been re-released and re-released multiple times throughout the years. So it's kind of like a Christian Hardy Boys is the best way I could describe this series. I feel like it's a little different than Hardy Boys in some ways, but it's kind of like a Christian Hardy Boys. That's the best way I can think of it. And in this particular book, you have this character, Danny Orlis, who he is kind of just gets into all kinds of different adventures of all different kinds. Like, for instance, the first book in this series I did not get because when I was looking at these on Thrift Books, I kind of thought they were an anthology sort of series like Hardy Boys. But the first book was like a football story, like a football high school kind of book. And I'm not really into those kinds of books. Like, sports books are a little bit boring to me unless there's some other element going on to them, which I have a feeling now that there's probably a mystery element that I am not aware of, even from just reading the back matter of that first book, which is very much about like a football game and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, okay, so maybe I do need to go back and read those now that I've read book 5, because I think it will actually make more sense and it will fit the series a little more, I think. So in this particular book, Danny Orlis is being sent by his dad, because Danny is now like a college student, from what I can tell. He's being sent by his dad to this property in Colorado to go explore it, because Danny's adopted siblings own the property, from what I understand from the previous books. So they own this property. It's like 2,000 acres in the Colorado mountains. And so Danny Orlis is going to go and find out what's there and what he can about it. So he goes with a friend of his cousin, Larry, and they go out to this property and with their other friend, Kit. And so the 3 of them are on their way, and there are some people who are also interested in this property. And in particular, this one guy named Harold, who apparently Danny Orlis has had run-ins with before. And so Harold's after this property as well, and Danny's trying to figure out, why does Harold want the property? And it leads to all kinds of things, including the case of the talking rocks. Now, I will say, this book was actually pretty well done in the excitement. There was a lot of adventure for an older book. I don't know if this is a reprint of an even older book. I think it is. It had a different title then when it came out, I think in the 60s. So this book definitely has that kind of old time feel. Like, for instance, I was telling my wife while I was reading this, I said, I don't know what it was, but there was this time period where authors were obsessed with jalopies, those like Jeepy sort of cars. Then they just always talked about jalopies. And in this book, there are tons of jalopies. And I just kept thinking, like, this there are no jalopies around nowadays, really. So what's going on here? Like, when is this book really set? And so it felt like it was really taking place in like the 50s or 60s, even though this book came out in the 80s when this particular edition of the book came out. So it has like a very old school style to it, like those older Hardy Boys or like the Annette Funicello books from Walt Disney. Like, it has that kind of old school vibe. It was also it was an interesting mystery, I will say. There's some different pieces to it. Like, you're wondering, like, why does this other guy Harold in wanting this property, trying to scare Danny and his friends off of it? Like, what's going on? What are the talking rocks? Which I actually thought that was a pretty interesting reveal when you find out what the talking rocks are all about. So I thought that was really great. And I feel like the adventure, like I said, was really good. There were some really intense moments. Like, there's one moment in a ghost town that was great. I loved it. So this thing, it hit all those kind of westerny tropes. You had like ghost towns, old prospectors, horseback rides, ranches, Colorado, like all these sorts of good westerny vibe things were here in this book, which definitely made it like fit so well with the June on the Range kind of theme. So I liked that a lot. I do have to say though, this is one of the most Christian books I've ever read in my life. Like, it is so filled with all kinds of discussions about the Bible, about God, about like salvation, all these different themes that are come out of Christianity. And I am a Christian, I'm a children's pastor, but I did find a lot of these transitions to the conversations about God to be very trite and convenient. Like, it was very much like pulling you out of the story because you're like, oh, the author is trying to share some religious material now. Here we go. Instead of it being an organic part of the story where it makes sense for them to talk about this or that. And there are some parts like that. Like, I will say, like, Danny Orlis as a main character, he prays a lot. And so it makes sense that when, like, he's in danger, he's, like, praying while he's, like, climbing up the side of a rock face. And, you know, not in the sense of, I think sometimes people think about praying in terms of everyone pauses and bows their head and closes their eyes and folds their hands and prays. But, like, he's praying as he's climbing, like, not bowing his head, closing his eyes. Like, he's, like, in danger and asking God for help because that's his belief system. So those moments were very organic and made sense. It was just some other moments that I thought, wow, this is a very long, interesting conversation about this particular Christian thing that has nothing to do with anything else that's happening. But okay, we're doing it. So this book is very, very Christian, I would say, in that sense. Like, just that it has a lot of Christian conversations. I will say, on one side, it doesn't fall into some interesting, like, traps of talking about Christianity. Like, it's very, like, open-ended in one sense, where the way it's talking about Christianity is very, like, not specific to a particular group of Christians' beliefs. So I thought that was actually pretty good, the way that they did that, but there is a lot of that material in this book. So if you do read this one, go in knowing that, like, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of characters getting saved. Like, it's a whole thing. I kept thinking, wow, this is a lot. And I will say, too, the nice thing is sometimes in Christian fiction, there can be this tendency for characters to pray and then boom, like, everything's fine. And they're, you know, it's what I call the Mandy effect. There's this book series called the Mandy books. And in one of them in particular, there's this, they're trapped in a cave and Mandy prays and asks God for a way out. And, like, immediately light shines on this way out. So, and she always does that throughout those books. Like, she prays and then boom, some solution is presented. And this book is not like that. It's much more realistic in the sense that they're asking God for peace or comfort or help in a situation, and they don't always get out of the situation. So I think that that was really great. Like I said, I think the mystery is pretty good. There's some good twists and turns. Some twists that you can't really see coming, in the sense of like a good mystery where you're following along and you're able to say, aha, I know what's going on, just like a page before that thing is revealed. Like, that's the best kind of mystery, when the authors know that they're coming up on a reveal. So they've laid the groundwork. the reader can kind of guess at it, and they're like, I think I might be right. And then literally a paragraph or page later, that particular mystery is revealed. That to me is the best kind of mystery writing. And there's a couple times like that in this book, but there's a lot of things you would never guess going in. So I think it was fun. It was definitely a fun read. I didn't dislike it, but I didn't absolutely love this book. I am curious to read more of them though. I kind of want to know what happened like before this book, because they talk about some very intriguing like plot things that they don't totally explain, so they're not totally ruined, but there are things that I know now that going back to books 1 through 4, I'll be like, oh, that's interesting. So this book, like I said, it's a mixed saddlebag. So at the end of the day, I would probably give Danny Orlis and the Case of the Talking Rocks a solid 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was good. I enjoyed it. I just felt like it did kind of suffer from some inauthentic conversations about Christianity that I thought, this is not really organic to the story. It's just kind of being put in here to be put in here and to send a message to readers instead of being organic, which I think is the best kind of Christian fiction, when the story organically presents the Christian themes out of what is happening in the book. So, because a lot of times, like I've said before, Christian authors can tend to start with a message and then build a story around the message instead of starting with a story and seeing what message comes out of it organically, because it makes a stronger story that way than having this kind of moment where you're pulled out of the story because you're thinking, oh, the author is like kind of intruding on the narrative here by having this conversation happen. So, like I said, it's a mixed saddlebag, but definitely I think it's interesting. If you're into any sort of Christian fiction, you like kind of westerny stories, this might be worth giving it a go. You might enjoy it. Like I said, it wasn't the worst. It wasn't the best. It's a mixed saddlebag. So, until next time, everybody, keep reading. Bye.